The beer hit the bar before she even sat down. Claire had been coming to Rusty's long enough that the bartender, a heavy-set man named Lou with a beard that had given up on having a shape, knew what she drank, and knew not to ask how her shift went. He just set the bottle down, gave her a single nod, and moved away. That was the entire transaction. That was exactly what she needed. She had been on her feet for 12 hours. Not standing around 12 hours. Not walking the halls 12 hours. The kind where you don't eat because there is never a moment where the world pauses long enough to let you eat. Where you drink cold coffee out of a paper cup while reading a chart that tells you something has gone very wrong for someone. And you have maybe 90 seconds to decide what to do about it. That kind of 12 hours. Her scrub still had a faint stain near the left cuff. She had tried to wash it off in the break room sink at the end of her shift and hadn't quite managed it. She pulled her sleeve down a little and told herself she would deal with it later. Later was a country she visited a lot without ever quite arriving. The bar was what it had always been. Low light, sticky floors, a jukebox near the back that someone had loaded with country songs from 20 years ago, and the kind of noise that wasn't loud enough to be unpleasant, but was consistent enough to act as a wall between you and your own thoughts. That was the point. Most people in Rusty's on a Friday night were not there for the drinks. They were there for the wall. She was halfway through her beer when she noticed the table in the back corner. There were 6 of them. She had seen groups like this before. Not here specifically, but in the area. The naval base was about 4 miles up the road, and the men it produced had a particular quality that was hard to describe and easy to recognize. They were not loud in the way that men trying to seem impressive are loud. They were loud the way people are loud when they are genuinely relaxed, when they are among the exact people they trust most in the world, and when the version of themselves they are required to be in other settings has been temporarily set aside. It was a real noise, an earned noise. One of them, a big man with a sunburned neck and what appeared to be a permanent grin, was in the middle of a story. She could not hear the words, but she could read the energy. His hands were moving. The others were leaning in. The story was about something that had gone wrong in a way that was funny now, in the way that things which are terrifying in the moment often become funny later, once enough time has passed to file them under survival instead of emergency. She did not look at them long. Looking long at a table of off-duty military men in a bar was an invitation, and she was not in the mood for invitations. She turned back to her beer and her thoughts and her quiet. The stool beside her scraped. She did not look up. "You look like you survived something today." She looked up then. Not because the line was clever, it wasn't, particularly, but because of the voice. It was even and low, and carried no performance in it. Men who were trying to make an impression put a certain weight on their opening words. A slight push, an angle. This had none of that. It was just a sentence said by a man who had looked at her for 10 seconds and formed an honest opinion. He was standing beside the empty stool, not sitting in it yet. That was the other thing. He had stopped to ask, which was either good manners or something close enough to good manners to pass. He was tall without making a production of it. His face was the kind that had been through weather. Not in the movie sense, not artificially roughened for effect, but in the literal sense of a person who had spent large portions of their life outside, in conditions that were not always forgiving. His eyes were calm. The eyes were the thing she noticed most. Not warm exactly, but patient. The eyes of a man who had learned to wait. "I work at a hospital," she said. "I always survive something today." He nodded once, like that was a reasonable and complete answer. Then he said, "Can I sit here?" She considered him for a moment. "Not long, if you want." He sat. He set his beer down with no ceremony. He did not immediately try to continue the conversation. He just sat there the way someone sits when they also have had a long day, and also needed a wall of noise and a cold drink, and the two of them occupied the same stretch of bar in parallel silence for about 30 seconds, which was somehow not uncomfortable at all. Then Lou came by and topped off her beer without being asked, and the man beside her watched that happen. "He knows you," he said. "I've been coming here since I moved to the area, 4 years ago." "Trauma unit?" She glanced at him. The cuff. He had noticed the stain she had tried to cover. "Trauma bay," she said. Yes. He nodded again. Something in his posture shifted. Not toward her, exactly. More like a settling. Like a man who had just learned something that reclassified the person beside him slightly. Long day? He asked. They're all long. Yeah, he said. And the way he said it, without sympathy exactly, without the softening that people who have not lived inside hard work tend to apply when they hear about hard work, told her that he knew what that meant. Not theoretically, actually. She looked at him more directly this time. You're from the base. It wasn't a question, but he answered it anyway. Team 3, she processed that. Navy SEAL. That explained the eyes. It explained the settled quality of him. The absence of performance. The way he had asked to sit rather than simply sitting. Men who have been in genuinely dangerous situations often lose the need to manufacture drama in normal ones. They have had their fill. Claire, she said, and offered her hand. He took it. The handshake was brief and firm, not a demonstration of anything. Marcus. Like the name or a call sign. The corner of his mouth moved. Like the name. Marcus Webb. She turned back to her beer. He turned back to his. The jukebox had moved on to something slower, and the bar had gotten a little louder as the hour moved toward 10. More people had come in. A group of women occupied 2 tables near the front, celebrating something. Birthday or promotion or escape. Impossible to tell from here. A couple sat near the window arguing quietly in the way couples argue when they have run out of new things to argue about and have looped back to an old reliable disagreement that they can navigate in their sleep. Claire watched all of this without thinking about it, the way a person watches traffic from a window. Just letting the world move. Do you like it? Marcus asked. She turned. The beer? The work. The question landed differently than she expected. People asked about her work all the time. They asked if it was hard, which it was. They asked if it was stressful, which it was. They asked if she ever got used to it, which was not a question with a clean answer. They very rarely asked if she liked it. The question assumed something about the nature of hard work that most people didn't assume, that it was possible to like a thing and have it cost you simultaneously. That difficulty and love were not opposites. She sat with it for a moment. Yes, she said. Most days. Today was not most days. He didn't ask what had happened today. She registered that. He left the door open and did not push it. What about you? She asked. Do you like it? He thought about it with the same seriousness she had given his question. I like who I do it with, he said finally. The work itself, it depends on the day. She found herself nodding at that. It was a more honest answer than most people managed. Behind them, the table erupted again. The big man with the sunburned neck had apparently reached the punchline of his story. The group's laughter was real and large, the kind that rolls through a room and briefly lifts the air pressure. Even people who couldn't hear the joke smiled reflexively, because laughter that real is contagious regardless of context. Marcus glanced back at his team with something in his expression that was quiet and warm and private. It lasted only a second. Then he turned back to the bar. She had caught it, though. That look. It was the look of a man who knows, with complete certainty, that the people behind him would do anything for him, and that he would do anything for them, and that this knowledge is the best and most stable thing in his life, and that he does not take it for granted for a single day. She had seen that look before. Not in bars. In waiting rooms. In the moments after a crisis had passed and 2 people who had worked a code together stood in the hallway not quite knowing what to do with their hands, just knowing that the person beside them had been there and had done the work and had not left. She understood that look completely. Your team? She asked, though she already knew. Since 2019, he said. She did the math without meaning to. 5 years of choosing the same people. 5 years of being chosen by them in return. Lou appeared again with 2 fresh bottles. He set them down and moved away without a word. Marcus pulled his toward him. Claire did the same. The bar carried on around them, ordinary and warm and loud in all the right ways. The jukebox cycled to something with a guitar. The couple by the window had apparently resolved or shelved their disagreement, and were sitting more closely now. The birthday or promotion or escape table near the front was getting progressively more celebratory. And at the bar, a trauma nurse and a Navy SEAL sat side by side with cold beers and no particular agenda, which was its own kind of rare thing, and both of them, without saying so, were aware of it. She picked at the label on her bottle. He watched the room. Neither of them rushed anything. The night, for the first time since she had arrived, did not feel like something to endure. It felt like something else entirely. The conversation had started the way most real conversations do, not with an interesting opening line or a clever question, but with the slow accumulation of small things shared at no great risk. She mentioned the hospital, the way shifts tended to run longer than scheduled, the specific exhaustion that came not from physical effort alone, but from sustained mental compression, the kind that left you feeling like a fist that had been clenched all day and had not yet remembered how to open. He listened without interrupting. That was the first unusual thing. Most people, when someone else is talking, are really just waiting. There is a version of listening that is essentially just politeness, a performance of attention, while the listener prepares their own next contribution. Marcus did not do that. He actually stopped. He took in what she said, sat with it briefly, and then responded to what she had actually said, rather than to the adjacent thing he had been planning to say anyway. She noticed this after the second or third exchange, and it rearranged her relationship to the conversation slightly. She found herself saying things more carefully, not because she was trying to impress him, but because she was talking to someone who was actually going to register them. She told him about the hospital, the way she rarely talked about it outside of work. Not the dramatic version, not the story people wanted to hear when they found out she worked in trauma. The version with the extraordinary moments, the saves, the near misses, the adrenaline. She told him the other version. The version about the waiting. The version about the paperwork that followed every emergency like a shadow. The version about the patient in room 4 who had been there for 6 hours and had not had a visitor yet and probably would not have one. And the way that particular detail sat in the back of your mind, all shift like a stone in a shoe, something you cannot remove and cannot quite stop noticing. He listened to all of that. Room 4, he said when she had finished, not as a question, just absorbing it. Room 4, she said. He turned his beer bottle slowly in his hands. She watched his fingers, not a conscious observation, just the kind of detail the eye lands on when the brain is fully occupied with something else. We had a guy, he said, not looking at her, looking at the middle distance above the bar, on a training op. Nothing went wrong. We all came back fine. But one of our guys, Reyes, he called his wife from the tarmac before we'd even debriefed. He paused. She didn't pick up. He called 3 more times. She was at the grocery store. Phone was in her bag. Nothing had happened. Everyone was fine. But those 20 minutes. Waiting. He shook his head. You carry those 20 minutes the same way you carry the real ones. The body doesn't know the difference. She looked at him. You carry room 4, he said, even when you leave. She had never heard it described that way. She had felt it described that way, every day, for 6 years, but she had never had a word placed on it that fit. Yes, she said, quiet, certain. The bar had shifted around them. It was past 10:30 now. The birthday table near the front had thinned. A few people had gone home, the ones with early mornings and responsibilities that did not pause for celebration. The couple by the window were gone entirely, leaving behind 2 empty glasses and a folded receipt. The jukebox had drifted into something instrumental, a guitar picking out something slow and thoughtful that nobody was really listening to but that sat in the background like weather. The table in the back corner had gotten somewhat louder. The big man, she had gathered his name was Diesel, a name that made complete sense the moment she heard it, had moved on from his first story to what appeared to be a second one, equally physical in the telling, equally well received. The others at the table leaned in and out of it, the way people do when the storyteller is trusted, when you have heard their stories before and know they are worth hearing again. Marcus had glanced back twice. both times with that same private warmth. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, meaning the work. Meaning all of it. 11 years, he said. Active. Before that, training. Before that, he smiled, brief and self-aware. I was a 19-year-old kid from Ohio who thought he understood what hard was. What changed your mind? Bests, he said. First week. She knew enough to know what that meant. Basic underwater demolition training. The program that filtered out the people who thought they wanted it from the people who actually did. She had treated a few men who had come through that process, years later, in her emergency bay. The bodies told stories. What made you keep going? She asked. After the first week. He thought about it. Genuinely. She appreciated that he did not have a prepared answer. I couldn't picture stopping, he said finally. Not in a determined way. Not like I was being heroic about it. Just, I couldn't make stopping make sense. The picture of me stopping and going home and going back to whatever normal was, it just wouldn't form. So I kept going. She understood that too. She had applied to the trauma program for the same reason. Not because she was certain she wanted it, because she couldn't picture not wanting it, because the other options felt like wearing a coat that didn't fit, and being told to stop mentioning the coat. I applied to trauma because the other units felt too quiet, she said. That sounds strange. It doesn't. I spent 2 months in a general ward before I transferred. Good work. Kind patients. Nothing was wrong with it. She paused. I was bored in a way I couldn't explain to anyone without sounding like something was wrong with me. Something was wrong, he said. You were in the wrong place. She looked at him. That's not a character flaw, he said. Some people need the room to be on fire. She laughed, genuinely, and a little against her will, the kind of laugh that escapes before you've approved it for release. He smiled at the sound of it. Not triumphantly, just pleasantly. That's possibly the most accurate thing anyone has ever said about me, she said. Including you? Especially me. They sat with that for a moment. The jukebox had shifted to something with drums now, something with a little more forward motion in it, and the room had taken on the looser quality of a Friday night that had decided to become a Saturday morning, whether anyone had planned for it or not. Diesel's story had apparently concluded with some kind of structural disaster involving a rubber boat and a sandbar, and the table's response was immediate and complete and extraordinarily loud. Claire turned instinctively toward the sound. The whole table was gone into it. All 6 of them, Diesel included, laughing with the specific abandon of people who have been through enough together that the ordinary rules about composure do not apply. Marcus was watching them again. Claire watched him watch them. There was something she wanted to understand about that look, not for any particular reason, just because it was interesting, and she had spent 12 years of her professional life paying close attention to things that other people overlooked, and the look on Marcus Webb's face when he watched his team was one of those things. She turned back to her beer. Then, without quite planning to, because it was the natural continuation of a conversation that had been moving honestly in one direction for the past hour, she asked, "You have a call sign?" He turned to her, mildly surprised by the pivot. "All of us do," he said. "What's yours?" He told her. It was a single word, something that had obviously been given to him by the team, rather than chosen, the kind of name that came from a specific incident, that he was clearly not going to explain in full, but that sat behind it like a history. She filed it away. It suited him. She nodded. And then he asked. Not as a test. Not as a game. With the same honest curiosity he had been applying to the entire conversation. The same quality of attention that had, over the last hour and a half, made her feel more accurately seen than she was generally accustomed to feeling. What's yours? The question landed in a different place than she expected. She had been asked many things tonight. She had answered all of them. She had not, until this exact second, felt the particular quality of weight that this one carried. Not because the question was loaded, because the answer was. She went still. Not with uncertainty. The answer was not uncertain. She knew it completely, had known it for years, had heard it said by colleagues and charge nurses and the attending physician she had worked under for most of her career. The woman who had given it to her in the first place, standing in the hallway after a particularly difficult night, looking at Claire with an expression that was part exasperation and part profound respect. The stillness was something else. It was the recognition that an answer she had carried quietly for years, inside the context of the hospital, inside the language of the people she worked with, was about to be said out loud to someone who existed entirely outside that world. And she was trying to decide, in the space of about 4 seconds, whether it would mean the same thing here. She looked at him. He waited. He was good at waiting. She picked up her beer. She set it back down. "Ghost," she said. The word left her mouth quietly. Not dramatically, not with any effort to shape the moment. She said it the way she said most things, clearly, without decoration, and then left it in the air for the other person to do with what they would. Marcus did not react immediately. He sat with it. The bar continued around them. Someone fed money into the jukebox. Diesel had moved on to a new story, though his voice was lower now. The table's energy gathered and attentive rather than loud. The bartender, Lou, was washing glasses at the far end of the bar, working methodically, his eyes on his hands. "Ghost," Marcus said. Not a question, not an echo, just the word, placed back into the space between them, the way a person holds something up to the light to see it properly. "Ghost," she confirmed. And because he did not immediately ask why, because he left the silence open and available rather than rushing to fill it, she found herself wanting to fill it herself. Not because she owed him an explanation, because he had earned the honest one. "In the trauma bay," she said, "when a code is running, when the room is full and the monitors are going, and everyone is calling out numbers, and someone needs a line, and someone else needs a chart updated, and the attending is making decisions out loud, and the whole room is moving at once," she paused, organizing it not for effect but for accuracy. "People look up and I'm already there." She turned the bottle slowly in her hands. "They don't know when I came in. They don't remember seeing me arrive. The crash cart is ready. The IV is in. The medication is drawn and labeled. The chart has been updated in the last 4 minutes. The room has gotten quieter, somehow, even though nobody asked it to." She stopped. Nobody saw it happen. It just happened. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. She became aware of it gradually. The way the noise around her had not stopped but had somehow receded. The way the table behind them had gone from low conversation to something quieter still. She had not raised her voice. She had not performed anything. She had described her work in the same tone she would use to describe anything else. But something had shifted. She could feel it without looking. It was the particular atmospheric change of a room full of people who have all, without coordinating it, directed their attention in the same direction. She looked up. Lou had stopped washing glasses. He was standing with one hand resting on the bar, glass held loosely, looking at her, not rudely, not intrusively, with the expression of a man who has overheard something he had not expected to overhear and does not quite know where to file it. Behind her, the table was fully silent. Not the paused silence of people waiting for their turn to speak, the held silence of people who have heard something that requires a moment before any response is possible. She did not turn around. Marcus was looking at her. His expression had changed in a way that was difficult to catalog. The patience was still there. The patience was structural in him. It was not going anywhere. But something had been added to it, something with more weight. "How long have you been called that?" he asked. 6 years, she said. "My attending gave it to me. Dr. Paulson." She pulled me into the hallway after a particularly hard night and said, "You know what you are, Claire. You're a ghost. You're never where I expect you to be. You're always where you need to be." She paused. She didn't mean it as a compliment at first. I don't think she was sure what she meant. But it stayed. "It stayed because it was right," he said. She looked at him. "A call sign," he said, "is right when it's right. You know the ones that are right because they don't have to be explained. You say the word and the picture forms. He held her gaze. Ghost forms. She felt something move in her chest. Small, steady. The way a thing moves when it has been described accurately for the first time. Behind her, she heard Reyes. She knew it was Reyes, because his voice was always the quietest of the group, the one that only spoke when it had something to contribute, say, to no one in particular. She's one of us. No one laughed. No one offered a counter-argument. She heard the weight of it. 6 words carrying something large, said without any irony, without the warmth that sometimes softened recognition into compliment. Said the way a man who has survived terrible things states a fact he has just identified. She didn't respond. Neither did Marcus. He was still looking at her. The patience in his eyes had deepened into something that she did not have a word for but that felt, in some part of her body she could not have named, like being understood. Not known, not admired, not found impressive. Understood. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the way the words sat differently coming from this table, from these men, than it had ever sat at the hospital. The hospital knew what she was. They had named it. But they named it the way you name something you use. Accurately, practically, because the name served a function. This was different. This was the recognition that comes when someone who has lived inside the same quality of experience, not the same job, not the same circumstances, but the same essential thing, the thing underneath all the specifics, the requirement to be present and functional and precise when the cost of the alternative is unthinkable, when that someone looks at you and names what they see. It hits differently. She picked up her beer, took a small sip, set it down. The bar had begun its slow return to itself. Lou had gone back to the glasses. The jukebox had moved on. The ambient noise was building back to its usual level, filling in the space that the silence had briefly cleared. But the table behind her remained quiet. She knew without turning that they were still there with it, that Rhea's 3 words were still in the air, that the 6 of them, men who had been through things that would not fit in a bar conversation, who measured their experiences in units that had no equivalent in the civilian world, were sitting with the image of a woman in scrubs who moved through crisis like weather, who arrived before anyone had thought to call for her, who made the room quieter without making it smaller. She thought about room 4 again. She thought about the man who had been there for 6 hours without a visitor. She had not saved him from that. She had not had time to sit with him, or call anyone, or do anything beyond ensure that his medical needs were being met. She had passed his doorway 4 times during her shift. Each time she had glanced in. Each time he had been looking at the ceiling with the particular expression of a person who has accepted that the ceiling is going to be the primary relationship of their day. That was the other side of the call sign, the part that didn't sound like pride. The part where being everywhere quietly meant that nobody saw the weight of it either. She was not sad about this. It was just true. She had made her peace with it years ago, the way you make peace with any defining characteristic. Not by pretending it costs nothing, but by deciding that what it costs is worth what it gives. Marcus must have seen something in her face, because he spoke again, and what he said was quiet, meant for her and not for the room. The thing about being Ghost, he said, is that the mission gets done. The room stays intact. The people who needed saving get saved. A pause. Nobody talks about the person who did it. That doesn't mean nobody knows. She looked at him. We know, he said, simply, completely. She did not cry. She was not a person who cried at bars, and she was not a person who cried at being recognized, and she had been through too many 12-hour shifts and too many hard nights to cry at the precise moment when something unexpectedly good happened. That was not how she was built. But she felt it. She felt it in the way a building feels a shift in the ground beneath it. Not visible from the outside. Real in every foundation. She turned back to the bar. She picked up her beer. Diesel, behind her, cleared his throat. Then, in a voice that was much quieter than any voice she had heard from him all night, he said, "Somebody buy her a drink." And Marcus Webb, Without looking away from his own glass, raised 2 fingers at Lou, who had already seen it coming. Marcus raised his glass. He did not announce it. He did not stand up or make a speech. He simply lifted it and held it level and waited. The table behind them went still first. Then, one by one, Diesel, then Reyes, then the others whose names she was still learning. Each of them lifted theirs. Claire was looking at the bar in front of her. She was not performing anything. She was sitting quietly, her own glass resting near her hand, and she felt the stillness gather behind her the way you feel weather before it arrives. She turned. 6 men, cold glasses raised. No irony, no theater. The kind of salute that is not about ceremony. The kind that means something happened here and we are acknowledging it and we are not going to put it into more words than it needs. She looked at them for a long moment. She picked up her glass. She touched it to Marcus's first, because he had been the one to ask. Then to Diesel, who nodded once with his whole chest, the way large men nod. Then to Reyes, who said nothing and needed to say nothing. Then to the others in order, each touch brief and definite. Then she sat back down. "Thank you," she said. Not performing gratitude, just delivering it. None of them said anything. They didn't need to. Lou appeared with 2 new drinks. He set them down with slightly more care than he usually applied to the act of setting things down. He said nothing either, but he also did not immediately walk away. He stood there for a second, which was a second longer than he had ever stood still in all the years Claire had been coming to Rusty's. Then he walked back to his end of the bar. The night had shifted again. The quality of the air was different now. Not heavier, not lighter, something in between. The kind of shift that happens in a room after something real has occurred. Not something dramatic or loud or visible to people on the outside, but something with genuine weight that the people present can feel in their chests. The jukebox played on. The table behind them gradually, naturally, found its way back to conversation. Not the same conversation. There was a quieter note under it now, a different register, something that had been added. But conversation nonetheless. Because men like this did not remain solemn for long in bars. That was not their language. Their language was forward motion. The next story, the next laugh, the next plan. The solemnity was real, and then it was absorbed, and the night continued. She and Marcus sat at the bar. The silence between them had changed texture. It was no longer 2 strangers sharing space. It was something different. Not intimate in the way a beginning feels intimate, but settled. The way 2 people feel after they have said something true to each other, and neither of them has retreated from it. "You're from somewhere else," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know?" "You said I moved to the area earlier. 4 years ago." She had forgotten she had said that. Indiana. Small town outside Indianapolis. You would not have heard of it. "Probably not," he agreed. "Ohio. You mentioned that. 19-year-old kid." "I didn't think you were tracking that." "I track everything," she said. "Professional habit." He smiled. "Ghost." "Ghost," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you miss it?" "Indiana." She considered this honestly. "I miss specific things. I miss how dark it gets at night out there. I miss that it's quiet in a way that this area is not. I miss my mother's cooking, though I would never tell her that, because she would decide it means I need to come home." "Does it mean that?" "No. It means I miss her cooking. Those are 2 different things." He laughed. Genuinely. It was a good laugh. Real and brief and unguarded. The kind you can't manufacture. She had made him laugh twice now. She noticed that she had started counting without deciding to. "Do you ever go back to Ohio?" she asked. "When I can. Which is not very often. My father is still there. My younger sister." He paused. "She has 2 kids now. My niece and nephew. She sends me videos of them and I watch them on my phone in places I cannot describe to her." Something about that landed quietly and completely. She thought of the men in her emergency bay over the years, the ones who arrived with no visitors, the ones who arrived with too many, all at once, which was its own kind of story. The ones who had people somewhere who sent them videos they watched in places they could not describe. "What are their names?" she asked. He looked slightly surprised. "Oliver and Meg. Oliver is 4. Meg is almost 2. He paused. Meg is already bossing him around. "Apparently this is consistent." She laughed. "It's always consistent." "You have siblings?" "One brother. Older. He moved to Portland, built a house, married someone lovely named Kate, and became the kind of person who talks about hiking with genuine enthusiasm. We are very different people." "But close?" She thought about it. "In the way that people who grew up in the same house are close. We don't need to talk every day. When something is wrong, we know. When something is good, we want the other to know. The space between those moments is our own." He nodded. He seemed to understand that kind of closeness. The kind that doesn't need maintenance. The kind that exists independently of frequency. Behind them, the table had gotten quieter still. Not because the night had ended, it was not late enough for that, but because the energy had naturally lowered, the way energy does after the peak of a good evening has passed, and things settle into warmth rather than heat. Someone had ordered food, apparently, because the smell of something fried drifted over from behind them. Diesel was talking in a lower voice, something longer, less of a story and more of a reflection. Reyes was listening. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Go ahead." "The work. The specific nature of it. What you've seen. Does it stay with you, or do you have a way of putting it somewhere?" She was asking as a person who had her own answer to that question, and was curious whether his matched. He did not answer quickly. He took a breath, turned his glass slowly once on the bar. "It stays," he said. "I used to think the goal was to not let it stay. That if you were built right, if you trained hard enough, if you had the right kind of mental discipline, you could put it down and leave it there." He paused. "That's not true. I know now it's not true. The goal isn't to put it down. The goal is to carry it in a way that doesn't break your back." She sat with that. "Carrying it differently," she said. Right. She had her own version of that. The way the bad days at the hospital did not disappear but were absorbed, slowly, into the texture of who she was. Not as wounds exactly, but as depth. The way every person who had died on her watch, every code that had not gone the right way, every room 4 situation that she could not solve, had not made her harder, but had made her more complete, more accurate, more precise in her understanding of what mattered. She was not sure she could have explained that to most people without them looking at her with concern. She did not think Marcus Webb would look at her with concern. "I had a patient 3 months ago," she said. Not looking at him, looking at the bar. 62 years old, arrived in cardiac arrest. We ran the code for 28 minutes. We got him back. She paused. He was awake the next morning. Asked for coffee. The nurse who told me laughed when she said it, like it was funny, which it was. She was quiet for a moment. "I still think about those 28 minutes more than I think about the coffee." "Because the coffee was his," Marcus said. "The 28 minutes were yours." She looked at him. "You own what you did in them," he said. "You always will. That's not a bad thing." She thought about that for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "It's not." The bar was at last call, or close enough to it that the crowd had thinned considerably. The birthday or promotion or escape table near the front was down to 2 people who showed no signs of leaving. Lou was stacking stools on the far end. The jukebox had gone quiet. Someone had stopped feeding it, and no one had bothered to start again, leaving the ambient noise of conversation and chairs and the muffled sound of traffic outside. The table behind them had become just the low conversation of tired men who had been out long enough, not ready to leave yet, but winding down. Diesel said something that made Reyes laugh. A short, surprised laugh, which seemed to be the best kind coming from him. Marcus heard it, and a smile crossed his face without him turning around. The private, automatic kind. She had been watching this all evening. The way he was connected to that table without being in it. The way he could be here, fully present in this conversation. while simultaneously existing as part of something happening behind him. It was not distraction. It was a kind of peripheral awareness, a constant gentle orientation toward the people he was responsible for, even in a bar on a Friday night, when everyone was safe and nothing was required of anyone. That was leadership, she thought. Not the version from books or speeches, the actual version. The version that runs quietly in the background all the time, not requiring acknowledgement, not asking to be noticed. She thought of herself in the trauma bay, the awareness she carried of the whole room, while her hands did their specific job. The way she always knew without looking where the charge nurse was standing, what the attending was doing, whether the second IV had been started, or only the first. The way the room existed as a total picture in her peripheral attention, even while her focused attention was entirely on the patient in front of her. She recognized what she saw in him because she had a version of it herself. Two different buildings, she thought. Same structural principle. She finished her beer. He had finished his some time ago and had not ordered another, which told her he was either finished for the night or being deliberate. She guessed deliberate. "I should get home," she said. He nodded. "Long day." "Long day," she agreed. She set her glass down, rolled her sleeve up enough to deal with it, slid her jacket on. She reached for her wallet. He had already set cash on the bar. Not hers, not performing anything, just placing it quietly before the moment made it complicated. She looked at it, then at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. She considered arguing, decided it was not worth the energy, and that he knew that too. "Thank you. Get home safe," he said. She stood, pushed the stool in. Then, because the evening had been honest, and the conversation had been real, and she had no interest in manufactured endings, "It was good to meet you, Marcus Webb." He looked up at her. That patient look. "You too, Ghost," he said. She walked out into the cool air and the parking lot, and the good, honest quiet of a night that had not turned out the way she expected, which was the best possible version of a Friday. The parking lot held its own silence. Not the silence of emptiness. There were still cars here, still lights from the bar behind her, still the distant sound of traffic on the main road that ran past the naval base. But the noise had a different quality out here. Muffled, softened at the edges. The kind of sound that emphasizes its own distance from you rather than its presence. Claire had not driven directly home. She had walked to her car, sat down in it, started the engine, and then sat there with the engine running for about 30 seconds, while she registered that she was not actually ready to go anywhere yet. She was not tired exactly. She was something else. Full, maybe. Too full to make the drive without letting some of it settle first. She turned the engine off. She got out of the car, leaned back against it, and tilted her head up at the sky. It was not a spectacular sky. The light pollution from the base and the surrounding area kept the stars at a modest count. A handful of bright ones, a scattering of fainter ones, the general impression of depth above without the full canvas that you got in places with more darkness and less infrastructure. Indiana had been better for stars. She had grown up under a sky that was genuinely thick with them on clear nights, the kind of sky that made the universe feel close rather than abstract. She had missed that. She still did, occasionally, when she let herself. She did not let herself very often. The bar door opened behind her. She heard it without turning. The increase in sound, the voices, the brief warmth of indoor air making contact with the outdoor cool before the door swung back. Then footsteps on the gravel. More than one set. The table was clearing out. She heard Diesel's voice. Lower out here, the volume naturally adjusted to the open air. He was saying something about a restaurant that was apparently open until 2, and apparently had what he described, at some length, as the best hot sauce he had ever encountered in 12 years of seeking good hot sauce. Reyes responded briefly. The others added opinions. The conversation had the easy drift of people who had nowhere urgent to be, and a direction anyway. Then the door again, different footsteps, one set. She knew without looking. He stopped when he saw her, not because he was surprised but because he was, as always, deliberate. Thought you left, Marcus said. I was about to. He nodded. He had his jacket on now. His truck was 3 spaces down from her car, and he had presumably been heading for it with a reasonable expectation of a direct route. He did not immediately resume walking to it. Couldn't make it make sense, she said. Because the phrase from earlier in the night came back to her. His description of not being able to picture stopping. She used it on purpose. He looked at her. The drive? The evening being over. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned, leaned against his own truck, and tilted his own head back at the same portion of sky she had been examining. The gesture mirrored hers exactly, without having been copied. It was just the natural thing to do when someone is looking at something. They were quiet for a moment. The parking lot held them both and required nothing. Diesel is going to get hot sauce on himself, she said. Diesel always gets hot sauce on himself, Marcus said. He has a system. A system for getting hot sauce on himself? A system for accepting that it will happen, and choosing shirts accordingly. A pause. Brown shirts, mostly. She laughed. He smiled at the sky. He's a good man, she said. One of the best I know. Reyes, too. Marcus turned his head slightly toward her. You got a read on them from back there. I get reads on people, she said. Professional habit. You said that before. It keeps being true. He turned back to the sky. What's your read on Reyes? She thought about it honestly. Quiet because he's watching everything. Not passive. The opposite of passive. He's the one who notices what's happening 2 minutes before anyone else does. She paused. He said I was one of you. He meant it as a structural observation, not a compliment. Marcus was quiet for a beat. Yes, he said. She understood that yes. It meant she had read it right. It meant Reyes was exactly what she described. It also meant Marcus was confirming, in the plainest way, that what Reyes had said was accurate and not merely kind. The cool air moved between the cars. Somewhere down the main road, a light changed. Can I have your number? He asked. The question came without preamble, without any of the architecture that people typically built around such requests. No careful segue, no half-joke to soften it, no deliberate drop in eye contact to manage the vulnerability. He asked it the same way he had asked everything else all night, directly, without performance. She considered him. She was not in the habit of giving her number to men she met at bars. Not because of any principle exactly, but because the men she tended to meet at bars were usually performing some version of themselves, rather than presenting one, and she had a low tolerance for performances. She noticed them quickly. They exhausted her. He had not performed anything tonight. Not once. Yes, she said. She told it to him. He did not enter it into his phone immediately, which she found interesting. He repeated it back to her once to confirm, and she could see him placing it somewhere, in whatever system he used for information that mattered. I'll text you, he said, so you have mine. All right. He stood up from his truck. She stayed where she was against her car. The distance between them was about 8 feet, which was, she noted, approximately the same distance it had been all evening. Close enough for real conversation, far enough for honest ones. Marcus, she said. He had started to turn. He stopped, turned back. She was looking at the sky again. Yours is a good one too, she said. He knew what she meant. He stood there for a moment. Yeah, he said. Yours is better. He got in his truck. She stayed where she was, one hand resting on the roof of her car, head tilted toward the partial sky with its modest collection of stars. The engine of his truck came to life, steady and quiet. His headlights came on. She saw them from her peripheral vision as he reversed, straightened, pulled out of the lot. Then he was gone. She stayed for another minute. She was not thinking about him exactly. She was thinking about the evening as a whole, the way it had arrived ordinary and become something else, the way the bar had held so many separate versions of a Friday night simultaneously, and she had occupied one of the quieter ones, and still left with more than she had brought in. She thought about room 4. She would go back Monday morning. The man in room 4 would likely be gone by then, transferred or discharged or moved, the particular arithmetic of hospital beds never allowing for much stillness. Someone else would be in room 4 on Monday. Someone else's ceiling. Someone else's quiet. She would pass the doorway. She would look in. She would carry whatever she saw for the length of that shift, and then carry it differently afterward, the way Marcus had described. Not putting it down, but finding a way to hold it that did not break anything. She would be Ghost. She would be in the room before anyone asked. The cart would be ready. The line would be in. The room would, somehow, be quieter. Nobody would see it happen. But somewhere, she thought, in a truck heading back to a naval base 4 miles up the road, a man knew. And that, it turned out, was enough. More than enough. She got in her car, started the engine, drove home in the good, specific quiet of a person who has been understood.